Hey there, listeners, and you already probably know what I'm going to ask you if you've listened to the show before. Go out there and click subscribe on the podcast or email us at podcast@nationalland.com. We want to hear from you. Give us ideas. Let us know topics that you want to hear from or guests that you want to hear from as well. And on with the show. Hey there, and welcome to episode 114 for the National Land Realty Podcast, where we discuss all things land. Our goal here is to inform, educate, and entertain those of you who own land or are interested in the buying and selling of land throughout the United States. My name is Mac Christian, and I am the Chief Marketing Officer here at National Land Realty. I'll be your host for this episode. Now, if you want to sell land or you have thought about selling land, listen to this podcast first. We're here today with West Texas land real estate broker Wayne Dunson, who has been a guest on this show many times, and it's always great to have him on board. And today we are talking about what might be the single most important part of selling any land. What is it? Well, you just have to listen and find out. Sit back and enjoy. I am sitting here once again with the one, the only, Wayne Dunson. You're out of West Texas. Wayne, you work both residential and land, which is actually like that brings a good, I think, a good perspective to the conversation, because we can kind of talk about real estate in general. But we're here to talk about real estate pricing and the importance of accurate pricing when you go to sell. It's important when you go to buy as well, because you got to look at your pocketbook, right? But we're talking about selling strategy, and Wayne, I'm just going to hand it over to you. Tell us a little bit about your background. For those of you who have not heard Wayne on here before, tell us a little bit about your history, how you got into real estate and national land.
Yeah, Mac, thanks for having me on today. It's always fun to hop in. It's like talking to my old bud. We just happen to we just roll some business in.
I question your taste if that's the case.
I won't even touch that one. So I went to school to work in the ag field, and when I finished grad school, I went to work for USDA NRCS as a range specialist, and I had a good time. Spent a few years doing that. Worked across the state as a range specialist, and then left that industry and went full time in real estate in 2008. And the whole goal of that was actually to sell ranches, and went to work at a small family firm where they just sold homes. And for whatever reason, I just sold houses for a lot of years. And during COVID, I had some slow time and was able to do some digging. Got lucky enough, found national land. And I was lucky enough to be able to join the team, and started in 2021. And have now been the broker for the West Texas office for nearly 4 full years now, which is amazing to me. So now I do both land sales and residential. I do commercial. I'm kind of into a lot of stuff, but primarily ag or recreational and hunting land, and then residential houses here in town too.
Yeah, I think you and I joined right about the same time. I want to say that we both joined National Land at the same time. Yeah. So we're talking about pricing, and I'm going to gear this conversation. I know we have a lot of agents that listen to this podcast. I know that we all have a lot of landowners that listen to the podcast. So that a lot of this conversation is going to be speaking to sort of the landowner perspective, but it's going to come from the agent's side. There's value in the conversation from both sides, I guess, is what I'm getting to. But this part of what I'm about to say is more towards a landowner. It seems when a landowner comes in and talks to our agents, and I know this just because I work on the side that does all the information for the landowners and helps put together the marketing material, is one of the first questions that we get, or the agents get in the field, is, what are you going to do to market my property? And that seems to be paramount in people's minds of like, how are you going to get my property out there? And the importance of that gets a lot of weight, which it is important. I mean, no one's going to say that, you can sell a property that doesn't get out there, right? Like, that's not a thing. But when it comes down to it, the pricing conversation is so important. And it is probably, this is where you get to throw me under the bus, is I would say it's probably the single most important thing that you have going for you when you take something to sale. Now I'm going to hand it over to you, now that I set all that up, because I'm going to dig myself out of the hole. if I said anything wrong. But tell me a little bit about the importance of pricing and how you gauge it when you work with clients.
Well, I mean, you're right. I mean, pricing is huge, and I got to say, for anybody that is listening to this right now, we got the best marketing team on the planet. We're going to go ahead and throw that out there because this is a National
You
Land
don't have to
podcast.
kiss up. You don't have to kiss up. It's okay.
No, it's the truth. It's the truth. It makes me look good, right? So if we can nail the price, the marketing does the rest already. So we've got a powerhouse team, and marketing is really a huge factor, especially with exposure. But from the pricing side, yeah, I mean, I think that's initially the first thing they all want to know, and you're right on that. What can I sell this place for? And unfortunately, a lot of times, until I get out there, all I can tell them is it depends. And they're like, well, okay, what do you mean it depends? Well, it depends on, what's going to be the best use for the property. What's it used for now? Is the future use going to change? What's the condition of the property? Has this been in the family and it's just been sitting vacant for 15 or 20 years and you inherited it, never rode out there as growing up, and the fences are falling down and there's no power anymore? All of these things, when we turn into condition, well, then maybe we move to size. How big is this property? So, what could it be used for? So, I actually took some notes because it's almost hard to, when I start looking at pricing, factoring in some of these things, and especially when it's just vacant land. As far as so I've got location is a huge factor. Um, if I'm selling a piece of ground and it's close to San Angelo and it's got some pretty terrain to it, and I've probably brought this up before, but if it's got oak trees, the price just went up automatically. If you throw oak trees on property in West Texas, the aesthetics of it change completely. And it's also known to harbor more wildlife because of the mass crop. So automatically the price just jumped. I mean, I don't care what you do. Now people feel like they're in the hill country, and in Texas, that's a big transition from the more desert conditions and the heavier mesquite and juniper. And so a location is big. What are they going to use it for? Recreation right now is probably the biggest driver for sales. But if it's got some possibility for solar, or maybe if it's in an area where you're on the outskirts of town, could this maybe be a development potential, or something for commercial? There's so many things that we have to take into account before we can really start making a decision on what am I going to compare your property to in order to get a price on this. Now, sometimes it's clear cut. If it's in the middle of nowhere, now I'm looking at what's the access. And if it's got really good paved road access, or it's fronting a highway or a good county road or a good, whatever access, that's always an important thing, I think. Um, but it really does depend. And so, for instance, I had a guy call me today. Well, yeah, he did call, in fact, and he's got 91 acres, and it's not far from me. In fact, I have 3 parcels that are closing today. Just south of the river from where this place is located. So I'm extremely familiar with what land prices look like in this area. And he said, well, what could I sell for it? And I told him, well, I don't know for sure. It kind of depends. and it's true. And I told him, I know of the places that I'm selling across the river from you, and I can tell you exactly what those are selling for. But his has a really great paved highway splitting this property. So I want to go out there and look at this and get boots on the ground first and see, could this potentially be a good laydown yard for a commercial buy? So like we have a lot of oil and gas out here. We also have a lot of transmission lines being run for solar and wind projects. And so could this be a potential area that a company would buy for a laydown yard to put all their equipment and trailers, set up a man camp, whatever? There's a lot of options that potentially could come from this fronting a highway and this highway splitting it. From a recreational standpoint, that's not great, but we may be actually able to get more money for this because it's sitting on a highway. So yeah, there's a lot of things that go into the price of a property, and it's a lot more complex than just everything out here sells for blank an acre. It's just not that simple.
I was just going to kind of jump into that territory, right? So that, let's take a theoretical example. Somebody has a bunch of land, say 500 acres, 200 of it is row crop, and they've got a part of it that's covered in trees, and they have a part of it that is nothing done to it, right? It's just open land kind of thing. And the question will be, well, what's ag selling per acre? Or they have intermittent ag, and then there's little spots in there that don't have, there's non-cultivated land in there as well. So when you come down to it, every piece of land is different, and you could say, oh, row crop 5 miles down the road sells for this, but that doesn't mean that's what it sells for in your area. You've also got to look at their water rights. You got to look at how much, what it, that's great. You have a setup for row crop, but can you get enough water to actually hold yay type of species or yay type of plant or whatever it is? You've got to dissect that land down by the acres and find the use for each different chunk of land within that whole parcel, right? Like it's not just an open conversation. Oh yeah, land is this much per acre. Like no, no. And then you just threw in the idea of maybe this has potential for commercial development. Maybe you can get something in there for power lines. Maybe you can get solar. That's a whole different area. And now you've got a quote for a whole different thing. And now you're quoting for potential and highest and best use. Valuating those, there's a lot that goes into this.
Yeah, you're right. And I hadn't really thought about this. So I would kill to find a place right now that had both native pasture and row crop. Oh, talk about a great property to get. Because nowadays a lot of the hunters want to have somebody come in and plant winter crops of some type. Yeah, it's good for the cattle, but they want to attract the deer or whatever. Or out here we got some areas where sandhill crane are a big deal.
Yeah.
And so yeah, having those crops, and of course cropland, depending on where you're at, is definitely going to bring a different price. And I know some places where dry land, even if it's just cotton, might be 12 to 1500 bucks an acre out here, and then that same ground in native pasture is going to bring 5 or 600. I mean, it's like there's a big difference. And then if you've got irrigated, now we're looking at 2,500 an acre. So all of that can change. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely a big one we find when I head east and get into the heavier hunting country is high fence. And so now we got to compare land to land. They're in the same area. This was low fence and it sold for this. And back out, I'm not going to put even try to account for what all kinds of weird exotic animals and $20,000 genetics that have ever bucked that's out there, whatever. I'm not even going to look at all that. So we're looking at land. And then now, and this is exactly what the appraisers do for the bank. They're going to adjust 10 to 15% depending on the property. And I'm like, well, what is 10 to 15? How do you pick which one? He goes, yeah, it depends. It's like, I don't know. There's no set way to do it. So that's what makes this so difficult. So when we meet with the seller and they say, well, so and so's place, they told me they sold for 3,000 an acre, and I don't think I want to let mine go for any less than that. And I'm like, first off, how can you prove that? Have you seen their contract? Because I think that's a bunch of baloney. That's way higher than anything has ever sold in this market ever that I can find. And I just dealt with this past week, and they said their cousin was getting X hundred. Well, it was, I'm going to say 4 times the market for their cousin's property. That's like 6 miles from his. Same land, same river, same location, everything. And I told them, I said, I can't prove that. Like everything I see is telling me this. Can you get a copy of the contract for your cousin and find out who this buyer is, and let's find out why they're paying that, because there's something we don't know about this deal. So I'm not going to say there's not some one-offs, and it happens a lot out here in the oil field. Some oil company will come up and pay just a exorbitant amount of money for a farm, and it's got nothing to do with the dirt or the farm or anything else. It's because it had good water, and they're planning to use every bit of water that's in that irrigation well and probably drill a few more. And they're going to be selling all that to use for oil and gas production. So, but those are one-offs. That's not market, right? That's not normal market conditions. So,
I mean, I personally, just from talking to agents, because we work on we have verbals with a lot of the larger deals, and then every agent sells their own stuff. But it seems like that conversation happens more often than not. I talked to so and so, they told me their land sold for this, so I want to sell for that. Even if it's next door, it doesn't mean that your land is worth that. Like that's what the difficult part about that. And it's the play that's different than residence, right? Because in residence, you get these really heavy comparables. You could be a couple miles away, but the layout is the same, the access is the same, the distance to a store is the same, the features are the same. They got granite countertops. They're both painted beige to match the CC&Rs. Like whatever it is, you have an apple to an apple, and in land you can have an apple to a papaya like within a few hundred feet. I mean, it's you don't have the same things right there. And so you're really gauging this off of expertise in that type of land. You're looking at other sales like and then you're putting this puzzle together of like, okay, this piece is here, this is worth this much, and then there's this piece and this goes here and then what if you and then you can also organize the sale, right? Like, well, what if you divvied this up? What if you just sold this chunk of land for this and then it you can do whatever you want with the land and evaluate it however there's a lot of variables that go into this and so how do you approach that like when you go into a piece of land like is it kind of that like you're like all right I got the puzzle I got to put it together now like is that or do you have a general idea or
Yeah, well, I do have a general idea now. Of course, I cover such a big area. If I was located in a different part of the state, I don't know that I would go as far. But where I live, it takes 640 acres to run one cow on a good year. And so we don't see a lot of turnover. So I spend a lot of time on the road, but there's a lot of open country here and it's all different. Uh, Stuff could be, I've sold stuff 2 hours east of me that was $2,700 an acre. And I've got some stuff closing now that's 450 an acre. And so there's a huge variation. A lot of that has to do with demand, right? So we hadn't even really hit on that, but supply and demand. Desert stuff out here where I'm at is just not as high demand. You can't do as much with it from a production or an ag base, right? You can't. And if it's even if it was fenced and had water, you couldn't sustain a herd all year. Like there's just you have limited use, you have supply and demand issues. There's a whole lot of things. But if somebody calls me and they've got a section in Glasscock County, and that's about an hour from me, really well known big deer hunting place. Like everybody knows that's a deer hunting mecca. But it's also covered in oil and gas, so there can still be variables. How drilled up is that? Does it look like a pincushion? Is there drill sites every 40 acres or whatever? Is it just covered up in oil field traffic? Does this, what are the fences like? Does it have good water? Is there power there, for a hunting camp or if you wanted to build a house out there, a shop? So there's still some variables that come into that, but in a lot of cases, I have a good idea generally, depending on what county it's in or what area from where I live that it's in. But there can be huge swings, even and like you were, I think, had mentioned or hit on this, depending on that property and how well it's been maintained, what it's used for now, uh, what's the composition of this property as far as was it cleared at one time and this is just an old farm that's grown back in, or is this native vegetation? Does it have any hills on it? A lot of that can change value. Even just little small things like that can change the demand side of that equation, and usually that will change the price. So yeah, I mean it's I a lot of times I think the hardest part, and I haven't even hit on that part of it yet, is so Texas is a non-disclosure state. We're not the only one, and so it can be hard sometimes to find that data. And I mean we've got a lot of platforms available to us, and it becomes honestly the guys that have been in this the longer, they've got a little bit of a leg up on that. And I'm getting to the point now where there's a lot of stuff that I don't have to wonder, what is this worth? I don't have any idea. I've got a pretty good idea about most of it. You still have some strange stuff, but if I have the time before I go look at a property, I'm going to get an idea of what stuff's been selling for. And then if I get out there and I find a surprise, it's like, okay, maybe I need to reevaluate what I had in my mind before I drove out here. But now that I see it, it looks just like what everything else that I've found, even if it's limited data. And we can look at what else is for sale out there that hasn't sold, but it gives you an idea of some things. But yeah, it's traditionally, though, if I can, I'm gonna have a pretty good idea before I go look at one
So
of
let's talk
what
about
it
that a
has.
little bit. So when you are setting up the base price, like how important is it to have the right price when you first hit market versus can you hit market and adjust price? Does that affect the sellability of the property? Because the conventional wisdom is that if you hit the wrong price and then you've got to drop a big chunk out of it, people worry about it because they think there's something wrong. Is the psychology that a lot of people are told about it. In your experience, how close do you want to be when you first hit the market? Does it matter, or can you adjust?
If I have the opportunity, I'm gonna drill it in as tight as they'll let me. The closer you can get to market, the better offers you're going to get and faster. That's just the way it's going to work. It does not mean that somebody's not going to sling a Hail Mary at you. There's people out there. I don't care if it's the best deal on the market for 400 miles. If they don't feel like they got something out of you, they didn't win. And that's a mindset about I got to win, I got to dominate you. And so they can go around and brag about I got that deal and I got this and this out of them. Oh, I'm the best ever. And that's ego. Or they just grew up thinking, grandpa always said never pay full price for anything. Well, you know what? Sometimes full price is a good deal, and over time that's going to go up. And if you lose that, maybe you're an idiot. But hey, whatever. To each their own. If you don't sleep good at night paying full price, don't buy it. But if I have a little bit of wiggle room, I don't feel bad with that because there's almost always land anyway. People do tend to want to try to sling offers, even if it's just a little. So I don't have a problem, but it's when if you can really drum up some good numbers, if I can really come up with, and just like we have our tool with the interactive BPO, and or I can get a summary of sales and put it together on an interactive map and lay it out and be like, listen, I got 3 sales. They're all within a close vicinity to you. They're all very much identical to yours. They all front a road. They were all the same thing, and they're all selling in this range. And if they look at all that and go, "Well, I want way more than any of those sold," that's probably not real. And then you have to get into the discussion of like, look, if this thing sits on the market, for one, if it's priced too high, people buying in that upper echelon are going to expect more for their money. And so they're not going to buy it, right? They're not going to swing at it. So if you're supposed to be selling for 750,000 and you're priced at $1 million buyer is going to expect something for their money, and you're not going to meet their expectations at all. And so they're just going to move on and go, wow, that was a really disappointing property. And if you're priced too high for your own buyers, you've priced yourself out of your own market. So now they're not even paying it any attention, and it's out of sight, out of mind. And after a while, the broker stopped looking at it, and so do the potential buyers. And then you got to hope as you languish on the market that some buyer new to the market picks up the app on their phone or gets on the computer and goes, wow, that looks cool. I wonder why that hasn't sold. And so you can end up, I always say it puts a stigma on a property that after a while they're going, that thing's been for sale for forever. And if they don't just glaze over it, just like driving to work every day, people don't even remember the drive because they're thinking about other stuff while they're going to the office. Well, when people are surfing properties and they see that picture, that's your first, view as they're scrolling through the land sites. They're just going to glaze over that like they never saw it.
I was going to
And
say, because that's what happens to older properties when no matter what real estate platform you look at, you could look at the land-based platforms, you could look at things like Zillow or Realtor.com. Older listings go to the back of the pack and they hang out back there. Now, everybody I know, everybody that I can think of out there is going to use filters on that, but it's still going to be at the back of the pack. And like you said, you get that familiarity. I've seen that picture before, and you're going to scroll past it. You could drop it 200,000, and somebody might not even notice it
yep,
that it changed because they know that picture and they remember what it was. So you've lost that freshness. I do see a lot of where they'll pull it down, relist, that kind of thing to try to spike the traffic again on it. You see that too, but then I think any savvy buyers out there look at it like, oh, the previous numbers that were on there were all gone. I know it was a different price before, but now it's gone. What are you doing here? And
yep.
like, I think people become skeptical of it if you didn't hit the right mark. Which brings me to my next question is we just got out of some of the hottest land markets anyone's ever seen. That whole COVID time period, people were buying and selling land like my son throws away Pokemon cards, right? Like it's I don't think he actually plays with Pokemon cards anymore. It's just a good analogy.
Sure.
But we just got out of that streak there where we broke records on a weekly basis for a couple of years, and everybody was making more money than anyone's ever made in land. And we've been out of that market for a bit. Like we're a good chunk of time out of it, but I don't think the mindset has changed on a lot of the land where it's like I want that record-breaking value. And also correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean the owner sets the price. Like you just facilitate the sale, but if the owner doesn't want to sell at a certain price, they're not going to. But dealing with those expectations, have those expectations changed a whole lot? Like, because I've seen some adjustment, but there's still some really high expectations on land value.
Sure. Well, first off, here's my take on setting the price. Who really sets that? In my opinion, and it can go both ways. I always say that the buyer sets the price because you could ask for whatever the heck you want for it, and if a buyer ain't going to pay it, that ain't the price.
That
And so,
that's a well said yes.
yeah, and so, and I actually wrote this down when I was talking about market value, and I wrote down here what a buyer is willing to pay and a seller is willing to sell for a certain property in an arm's length transaction. So if the buyer's not willing to pay it, the seller could set a price all day and it's just going to sit there. And so I always say the buyers help dictate that, right? It's a compromise. It's two people coming together, but it's got to be both meeting there. Um, as far as expectations, we're finally, thank the Lord, in a position where interest rates and what we see in the news and what we've seen with inflation and all the politics and everything that's been going on, uh, it has tempered people's expectations just a little in my area. And I'll tell you, so there's microclimates. When you look at the housing market in where I live here in West Texas, we're about 85 to 90% oil and gas based. They shut in the oil fields when we shut off the world during COVID, the 10 days to stop the spread junk. Well, we shut off the whole planet and there was no demand for oil and gas. Well, guess what? The oil companies shut in everything and laid off 17,000 workers. That's one of the worst years I've ever had in my career during COVID here in Odessa and Midland is because we had nobody working. So you couldn't give a house away. It was a horrible market here. You went to other places and they're like, oh man, this is so fun. We're selling like crazy. And here in Midland, Odessa, we were languishing. So markets can change. When you look at land markets last year was a big attitude adjustment for a lot of people. The 46 counties. So the Texas A&M Real Estate Research Center keeps stats on data here in Texas. Well, more than one state actually. And West Texas region makes up about 46 counties out here where I live. I'm at a convergence of two zones. One of them is the plains going up towards the Panhandle, Lubbock and Amarillo. Their sales were down something like 66% for the year last year, and sales in the West Texas region were down, I think, 72%. So this is land sales, as recorded by A&M Real Estate. So this is not like some MLS data. This is them recording land sales, and it's specific ag. And we just got toasted last year, and interest rates, of course, had a lot to do with that because rates were up to, on land, 8.5% to 9%. And what was really crazy about that, at least in my area, a lot of the land sales are cash, right? Well, so why, if they're cash sales, are they not buying? So it's obviously not the rate because they're not getting a loan, most of them. So that then you start getting into economic conditions and inflation and the fact that their money is not getting spread out as much. And now you're looking at a line of credit. So if they're operating a small business, and there's some of our bigger land buyers out here around Midland, Odessa, and I operate in West Texas. And those are the guys out here running these oil companies, these little startups. And we got a lot of service companies that are family owned out here. Well, if their line of credit is getting maxed out and the interest rate on that's an insane amount that they're having to wade through, the price of fuel was up, wages didn't go down. You know what I mean? It was like a perfect storm. Now, when you see an ag producer sitting out there and they've got a piece of land, maybe they're not really looking at it from that aspect, but commodities were not up and the price of feed was sky high, price of diesel was sky high, everything was up, right? So, I mean, I think last year we kind of took a licking and people just weren't buying. So I don't feel like we saw land prices drop, but what we did see is much less in the way of sales. So demand was way off, and only the best of the best sold. And you know what's weird is the price per acre went up. Go figure. So what did sell demanded?
Was that as a cause of inventory then? Which I mean, that's
Yep.
been a kind of a nationwide thing. Is the
Yeah.
inventory dropped through the floor, which kept the price high, which is not what people want. But there's no inventory, so the price isn't going to drop because the demand is still there.
Yeah, it's so weird. So supply and demand. We had almost nothing sell, but what did sell fetched a really high dollar. So price per acre went up. It's just boggles the mind. And I think every seller I've talked to the one person that pulled the biggest sale out ever in the county. That's what they want to get.
It's that
And
PR release that we go for.
yeah, and so I think everybody obviously, and it's for a number of reasons that expectations can be high. And you and I we discussed this, and I don't know if this is even the appropriate time to hit it, but if you sell a house and that's where you raised your family, uh, there's a lot of memories there. And if you open the closet door and you see the lines where you've been marking off your kid's height every year, and you remember bringing the baby home and the first dog, and you got all these memories in a house, and you move two or three times, and it's not that big of a deal anymore. But that one home, man, that was the one, right? It was hard, and there's a lot of memories, and maybe you repainted that yourself. And I've been a victim of this. I've felt the emotion of selling a home that I redid myself mostly, and it was kind of hard when they do inspections and they start nitpicking me, and I'm like, do you know what I put into this? Like, I don't want to hear your crap. And I sell real estate for a living, and I was feeling it. And now I don't care. I'm like, whatever. But I've been down that road with the emotional sale before. And when you sell a piece of land and it's been in your family for multiple generations, and you grew up there, and you remember grandma out there and running cows and hanging out and doing all the things, there's a lot of not only sweat equity from the family working on that all those years, and you got all these memories out there. And I brought this up, but you can't sell emotion. You can't sell the memories. If you could, imagine the price tag. There'd be some really expensive stuff out there, but that doesn't come into play. The buyer doesn't care about all that. Maybe it's a cool history to know. And I can tell you about a place I've got listed right now where the grandma used to get picked up by the school bus next to the windmill. Really cool story out in the middle of nowhere. I'm like, dang, that bus driver probably saw a lot of deer. Of course, that's coming from a deer hunter's perspective. But that there's just so much emotion tied to a lot of land. Now, I have some people that inherit some things and they haven't seen that in forever, and they're like, "Oh, we want to max it out, but I don't really care. Like, we don't give a crap about it anyway. Just sell it." And so sometimes those can be a lot easier because they're not emotionally tied to it. But the expectations sometimes don't even have to come just from what they're hearing at the coffee shop at the local place or the feed store, or whatever Tom and Bob are telling them. It can literally be tied to some of that. Some of that for sure plays in because they go to the local stores and they talk to all their buddies, and they're being told that everything is selling for whatever. And so they're like, well, wow, I don't know what's going on with the rest of the market and rates, but if they're selling for that, I want to sell for it. But then when you add in the emotional tie to all that, that's hard. That's really difficult. And I can't just go to somebody and go, look, we don't care about grandma and grandpa. Like, we're gonna just eliminate all that from your memory, wash that away, and here's what it's worth. And let's get practical. You can't approach it that way because it's a sensitive topic, right?
Yes. Well, and I would say that finding somebody that doesn't care about the land is probably a rarity.
Yeah.
Land is some. I could sell houses all day, but with the acreage, that's a whole different thing. Like the emotional ties to land tend to be stronger, just by nature of what it is. So when you work with somebody how do you go about, I guess it's a two-sided question, is one, how often do people's expectation of their land worth exceed what the market will bear, meaning they think it's worth more than it is? And if that's the case, how do you adjust the seller's expectation? They're like, okay, I know you have three generations of family here, but this is a field of sagebrush. Like how do you adjust that?
Well, it's not easy, and the only way to do it, in my opinion, really, is to show them the facts. Like you have to show them, and they don't have to believe it. And this is something, and I don't know if it's putting it in the right sense, but I call it confirmation bias. So they're going to try to look at stuff that reinforces their own ideas because that's what they're trying to tie to. And that's hard to get past, right? If they just got in their mind for whatever reason, my place is worth this, they're going to go out and look for something that supports that. They'll go, get online real quick and let me show you this property. And I'm like, that's 90 miles from here. And it's got a mansion and a stocked fishing lake. And you don't have any of those things, right? Those affect value. But that's what they're going to do is they're going to go out there and they're going to hunt for stuff that reinforces what they've got in their own head. That's human nature. And so the only way to offset that or to try to counter what they're believing is to show real hard data, real numbers. And it's hard to come up with sometimes, but when we can, and you show that to them in an objective manner and say, listen, here's all these properties. They're similar in acreage. They're close to yours or as close as I can find. It's real similar land. Most people that own land like that, especially if it's generational, they know what's there, right? They're not dumb. They know that better than anybody that comes in there. They could probably tell you where every tree on that property is, right? But they also know what their neighbor's land looks like, and they know like they have a really solid understanding, probably better than almost anybody you'll talk to about what they've got there. So it's just a matter of finding something similar in that general vicinity of same size, similar makeup of brush or cropland, same type of fences, same, similar location. Hopefully it's a recent sale. Recent as I can probably, get it anyway, because they don't sell every day like a house does. But that's the only way, in my opinion. And you can say, listen, I found an outlier and here it is. But guess what? I found another one and it sold and it was way low. And I think that's a one off. And maybe that was a distressed sale. Maybe they needed the money really bad. Maybe there's something there we can't see in the pictures. So, you have to try and provide facts because people aren't going to believe. I wouldn't. Somebody that can't give me some hard numbers, right? Show me the data that proves to me that this is worth that. And even then I may want to come off that a little bit. Okay, I'll work with you if you're going to get pretty close and we're not way over, but these are the numbers and this is the best data I can provide and I can tell you why. Uh, that's the only way to do it. Um, and sometimes I call appraisers. I say sometimes, a lot of times, I'll call appraisers and ask them, "Do you have any off-market sales that you could provide to me?" And you know what? They'll almost always do it because I do the same for them when they call me. And and I can get data that's off market sometimes. It's just really invaluable. And I can say, listen, this isn't even an on the market sale, but I can tell you about it because the appraiser gave me this, and this is probably the best one that I've got. And I had that happen, and showed the guy a comparable sale and said, "There's no way we could go over this. This thing is just like yours and then some." And he goes, "You know what? You're right." And we got it priced, and it was still really tip top of the market. And it took me 7 months, but we got it sold. Um, and he priced a little high, but not enough to hurt us. We got a ton of offers, and he wouldn't take them till he got close to what he wanted, and we finally got it. But it's all about the data, and I think if you can't provide that, it's a hard one to pitch. It really is.
You brought up a really useful strategy there as far as talking to a local assessor. And you also brought up our internal, so this is a shameless self plug for the company, right? Like we have our BPO tool. BPO stands for broker price opinion, where basically it's a price matrix of sold properties and stuff. And we've developed this technology internally to be able to develop it automatically and do that. And now we still have to go through, real estate means and get an actual broker's price opinion, but it's an automated tool that helps you get in range quickly. How much does that play into it? Does that play part of your strategy when you're going into pricing?
Oh, 100%. Because Well, for one, I mean, it sounds, I don't know, it shouldn't sound crazy, but it helps me organize my thoughts. So when I can lay out some sales and compare acreage and price and what's on the property, because it really is a comparison tool. And that's really the only way to price one. We're looking at what stuff is selling for. You have to compare to what other properties like it have sold for. And if there's something different about that one, then what is it? And not everything is going to particularly bring more money, but it could make it more marketable. So if you've got a lot of decent roads, you got a bunch of two rut roads running around where people could drive around and just look at their place, and maybe drive around and see the fences and just stuff like that. Like roads don't sound like much, but that's one of the most cost-effective ways to increase uh, the sellability or the marketability of a property, if they can just get out there and access it. And so many of them don't have that, right? So we have to look at all of these things and take those into account. And here's what I like. So like when you look at we have a summary tool in our BPO thing that I really like because it just lays out price per acre and compares the three, and boom, and here's a number. Like this is middle of the range average of these three. Here it is all mapped out. And then I can email that and they can use this tool and zoom out and around. It shows their property, it shows the sales. And I'm like, how do you dispute these? Like these are identical to yours. And I just did this the other day and I was sort of blown away because it was actually a development property. And when he told me where it was, it's about an hour north of here. And I was going, ooh, man, there's probably not going to be anything like this. And lo and behold, I went into our tool, went up there, and I found three. Bam, 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 and they were all within the similar vicinity, and they were identical. I mean, it was like the stars aligned, and I'm like, look at this. And I sent him the interactive map, and he goes, "Oh, okay. Well, I need to talk to my sister," because he was thinking I wouldn't be able to come up with some numbers, and I laid him out, and they weren't quite where he wanted to be, but he couldn't dispute the facts, and it doesn't mean he has to sell either. He can just hold on to it. But he was shocked. And I was shocked too, honestly, that we had those sales. Some development tracks, those aren't always easy to find, especially out in the middle of nowhere. And I found three. I actually found like five. And so obviously I picked the best ones.
But I mean, it's a good note. I mean, if you're that's why I wanted to drive the question back, or the conversation back to landowners is, man, when you go into the process, don't just talk to one agent, talk to a couple, shop them. The technology that they have at their fingertips is going to matter. And I would say it probably matters more than I'm the marketing person, and I'm going to say that stuff matters more than the marketing, because that gets you what you're going to go to market with. That's your product, right? And if your product sucks, no one buys it. Like that's a lot of people put a lot of energy into marketing, and the best marketing goes to products that sell themselves. And granted, there's a million marketing campaigns out there that sold junk, but people usually realize it's junk after a while. But the technology that they have at their fingertips, if they don't have it, then there is more risk that you don't get the right price, or that you are guiding the conversation more than the expert is, and you want to be able to rely on the expert. And that, like, it's an important part of the conversation. There was one I let you slip on, and I'm not going to let you slip on it. How many? So because it's not your fault that we deviated off to the wilderness. How often do you find it that when you talk to clients, what, like, rough percentage, super rough, that the expectation is higher than the market will bear?
Oh gosh, it's got to be like 95%.
Yeah.
It's got to be high, maybe more than that if I really broke it down. Um, I'll put it to you this way: I'm shocked when I give them a number and they go, "Really? I had no idea it'd sell for that," and I'm going, "Wow, why couldn't everybody feel this way?" Because they almost all expect more. They really do. Um, and I don't know why. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we have all this data online now. And it's not all. That's because where I live, there's a lot of absentee landowners. So they're not at the local coffee shop. If they're at the local feed stores, because they're popping in, and it's different if they grew up there and they've just moved off for work and they still have family there and all that. And they're still anchored back there with roots. But I've got so many folks that aren't at all anchored in any way, and they don't have any idea. So my assumption, and I'm just guessing this, because is they go online and they just look at stuff and they're like, Mine could probably pull that. I mean, this is, and they're just get. I don't know where they come up with some of these numbers. I really don't. I mean, some of it obviously has got to be online. Just digging through whether I mean it could be any site that's got a data aggregator, whether it's List Hub or any of them, land.com or land and farm or land flip or whatever. And the rest of it probably does come all from talking to the neighbors and talking to whoever at the cafe and the feed store and whatever. But yeah, I would say a good majority of them come in with an expectation initially that's higher than what it's really worth.
So when you go in to meet with a new client, they're that expectations conversation, like you need to go in with the data or have the data available to you. It happens almost every time. You've got to adjust some expectation in there.
Yeah, I mean, really, at this point, it depends on the situation, right? Because every situation is going to be a little bit different on how we're doing it. If it's somebody that's absentee and they're not even going to meet me out there, which makes it even harder because now they don't even know who I am, right? They see my picture on our website. They talk to me on the phone, but they don't really have a real feel for me, like know me, and that can be even harder because now you got to prove that to somebody that doesn't know you at all. So it would be a lot more fun if I got to meet everybody. Um, but that doesn't always happen. So yeah, a lot of times, if I may have an idea, but I stay really open minded when I go look at a property and just take notes, take pictures. I'm weird, but I fly my drone a lot of times on a place that I've never been to before. Helps me cover some ground without having to literally step on every square foot of it. And I take that back with me and I send it to my landowners and say, I wanted you to know I was there today. Took some pictures with my phone. Here's some drone shots. Enjoy. I'm going to be doing some homework on this and I'll get back to you. And for one, that at least proves that I've been there. I don't always have that kind of time, but I try at a minimum to do that. Now, if I meet with the owner and I would much prefer that, I may not take a single photo because at that point in time, we're there together and they're telling me about it. And I'm taking notes or at least mentally taking notes about things. And I'll get back in the truck and start trying to write stuff down real quick. Like, I don't want to forget all these things he told me. And then I'll go back and start pulling. And sometimes you're blown away when you go to a place and you're like, my God, this is amazing. Like, what a cool spot. And then I go to some other spots and I'm going, this is going to be really hard to sell. Like, all right, let's go see if I can find some numbers on this because this isn't what I thought it was before I came out here. And so, yeah, it's always a surprise, but that's what makes it fun, I think.
So I want to dig a little bit behind the veil on sort of the introduction process. So, like I said, if you're a landowner and you go to sell your property, what I want to say is grab a national land agent, don't talk to anybody else, and just roll with us. But that's not good business, right? Like, talk to several, see who you fit with, um, check the right numbers. But how often, because I know what happens, do you personally see a competitive agent tell a landowner just to try to land the deal that they can get more for the property than anybody else can? Is that a sales tactic that goes down quite a bit?
That crawls under my skin so bad. Uh, I mean, that's the one thing that really, really makes me angry because it's deceptive. And from the Realtor Code of Ethics, we're not supposed to mislead on value.
Totally
And
that.
and
But they
and
totally do.
and they lie to get that. And what we call it in the industry is buying the listing. They
Yes.
just bought the listing by giving you a made up number. And so, funny story about this. We just went out. I took my kiddo and my wife on a little day trip out here, a couple hours southwest of town. Really cool area. And as I was driving out there, I was reminded of a place where a guy did that. Not only did he buy the listing, he bought it for double what the real market value was. And it sold for exactly what I told him it'd sell for. But it was, a year later. But it happens all the time, and it doesn't have to be that particular scenario. We could talk about all day, and nobody'd agree on the same thing. But they do happen, and it's deceitful. And what they'll do is they'll grind you down, and you will likely sell for less than what you would have sold for had you just priced it right. And it's hard, and people want as much as they could possibly get. And when somebody gives them this salacious number, it's hard to not want to buy into that. And I have to go into do they have facts to back it up? Or does it just sound good? Because if you can show me multiple sales that are bringing in $1,000 more an acre in the same vicinity, show them to me, because obviously I screwed up, and I'm not going to say that I can't miss it. But and here's the weird part: they don't usually tell you they're doing it, right? They just cut off all communication, and then you see it hit the market, and you're like, "Come on! Like, why did they buy into this line of malarkey?" And if you'd had an opportunity, but they obviously feel guilty because they know they've already used a lot of your time, and then they just make this one call and go, let's just check with so and so and just see what they say, and then they get this number and they go, whoa, well, the hell, that guy, this dude's going to get us for more. And I have a prime example. A property was listed for $1,500 an acre, way out of the market for this property, and I sold it this summer for 900. And as soon as the listing expired, they called me because I'd already talked to them prior to this, and we sold it in like a week or two. So, but they had to let this person drag them out. In fact, I'll be honest, I was number 3. They had tried it twice and didn't get it, and finally got realistic. I was lucky to be second or third in line this time, because I got to be the one that sold it because they were ready to get real. Sometimes that happens, right? So sometimes being first in line, it's not always best.
So it would seem like, just kind of from a pragmatic approach, again, from the landowner's perspective, you're talking to multiple agents and one, you don't like the price, and the other one comes in really high. You need to start asking questions, and you need to find out who has the data to show their rationale. And if the data doesn't line up, because I mean, like you said, confirmation bias, right? I'm going to sell your land for double, but the land they're showing you for a comparison has a mansion on it. You should know, that that's not a good comparable, but you might not, because you see the dollar bills. It's hard to overlook certain things when you want the money. So the best advice would be, if you get different opinions, you need to start asking questions. Otherwise, you could be doing exactly what you just talked about, sitting on the market, going to your third real estate agent, being like, all right, I guess I'll sell my property for what you said. Like, no one wants to do that. No one wants to sit on there, because I mean, you're talking, I don't know, it depends on how long the listing agreement was, but 6 months to a year, it could be a long time dealing with somebody who didn't price your house right to begin with, or a house. I mean land.
Yeah.
Maybe land with a house. Well, just cover me there.
Yeah.
But when you get those different opinions, instead of shrugging off the lower price, that's the time to really start asking, is that the right price? Because to our point we've already discussed, if it sits on the market longer, you got more problems to overcome. Like, there's going to be more issues, or
Yeah.
or there's the opportunity cost, right? Because certain buyers are on the market, and what you see a lot of the time is somebody will pull it and then sit on it for 6 months and then launch it the next year. Like, did you really want to hold that land and pay the taxes for another year? Like, was that in your plans? If that is, cool. But there could have been buyers in that meantime that would have gone with the price. There's opportunity that could pass by in that time.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And some of that boils down to motivation. And that's that can be all over the board. We have people that say, and sometimes it's hard to know. So this is because in real estate we're really dealing and managing people at the end of the day. And this is a funny joke. I think any realtor would agree, but I always say, if you remove people from real estate would be easy. We're just buying and selling land, right? And
Pokemon
nothing.
cards, man.
Yeah, exactly. It's so simple. If you just took people out, we'd just be selling stuff. But navigating through the people, that's the hard part. And you'll have guys, I hear this all the time. Well, and you'll hear it on probably a lot of podcasts. I know what I got. Okay.
Oh,
well,
Facebook Marketplace, man.
Yeah. I know what I got. I ain't gonna sell it for any less. And I'm like, well, you may never sell it. But the other one is, well, I'd sell it for the right money, but they won't tell you what that is. There's a lot of gameplay because the sellers don't always want to give up what they take for it, and they're worried they're going to undersell themselves. And I'm like, well, look, I'm not the competition. Like, I'm not here to undercut you. Like that's not my goal. And maybe there's people out there that are just want a quick sell and move on, get some bucks and go on. I don't. It's not me competing against my seller client to beat them up on price so I can unload this thing real quick and go get a blizzard. Like
You'll take this
I'm
for half off? Sure, let's put it on the market for half off. Like, yeah,
yeah,
that's not
yeah.
the thing.
But I think that's a trust issue, and that could change. There's probably a lot of reasons. I'm sure that the skepticism was earned at some point, in their life. So I don't. I'm a skeptical person too. So I mean, I feel like, and we discussed this one time, and it was totally unrelated to the topic we're on now, but it's been really heavily on my mind lately about because you see people just switch off realtors like this. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's like they're shopping insurance rates. Um, and I have a guy for my insurance, and when I call, I trust the guy to give me a good rate. And could I maybe save 6 months if I went somewhere else? Maybe, but then they're just going to raise my rate after I move over there. Probably, they're all going to be pretty similar. But I want to be your guy, right? I want to be your realtor. When I need something done for my plumbing, I've got a guy. And somebody told me, "Oh man, you could do that yourself for way less," or blah blah blah. Well, yeah, guess what? I'm not a professional plumber, and I'm probably going to screw something up. So I could spend my time focusing on what I know how to do, which is real estate, and I'm going to hire a professional plumber, and he's going to take care of it, and it's going to be worth what I spend to get it done. And I don't question him. And the reason I don't is because I know the guy now, right? So I don't always have that luxury with some of these people, so I can understand that. But I want to be that guy. The only way to do that is to operate with integrity and build a relationship over time. So you've got to prove yourself that first time, and that's hard. And you've got to, the only way to do that, I think, is hopefully you're a referral. If you were referred by somebody, you've knocked the ice off of that introduction already. And I love that. I love referrals, and I mean, I live on those things. Maybe you got a lot of good reviews on Google or whatever, and I really need to work on that. Just asking for those because that's hard. I'm not good at asking for people to praise me. Uh, but there's a lot of things that you can look for as a seller that maybe will make you feel a little bit better about this person when you go to approach them to help you. There's a lot of stuff I think that makes your credibility with the numbers you're trying to show them seem more easy to believe. I mean, there's just so much that goes into the psychology of working with people in real estate beyond just the pricing and the land and the acreage. And, there's, boy, you could just talk all day about that, I think.
So we started out the conversation talking about how when you go to talk to somebody, the price is in there. What do you think this will sell for? And I think, like I said, I think marketing gets too much credit when it comes down to selling a property. So I feel like it's appropriate to give a little bit of a peek behind the veil on how properties marketed, how land is marketed, because I think that there's value there. I think if I'm going to sell something, I want to know how it's marketed, because I think that there's so many fancy things that you can say with properties that get people in front of them. And marketing is very, very important when it comes down to a property. And we're talking let's be really, really simple with marketing. What is it? It's making sure that people that are looking for property can find your property. That's it. That's marketing is a fancy term for saying that. And if it's not a fancy property, if it's not like, I mean, if it doesn't have a mansion, if a movie star didn't own it, is it under $10 million? And we do say $10 million. It depends on the area, right? There can be a $5 million property in an area, and that's really high for that area. But to move the needle for like a really important property, like it's like your 10 million plus properties in an area, if it's not one of those things, a lot of the marketing is going to be very, very similar when it comes down to what an agent can do and can't do, because you can't make people look at something that's not important, right? Like everyone looks at tennis shoes, but someone's going to look at the new Jordans. That's a, don't ask me where these things pop into my head from. It's just the first thing that came into my head.
I'm there with you.
But there's a lot of things that like don't move the needle. Then there's something that moves the needle. If you're not something that moves the needle, your marketing is going to be remarkably the same. So anybody that tells you any different is just wants the sale, and everybody wants the sale, and everybody's got a shiny thing. They're going to say, well, we have a magazine. Well, we have this. Well, we'll put out a YouTube video or like, and those help. Like those help. But is your property one that's going to move it? Does the product sell itself? And the the key things are like a lot of land doesn't go on an MLS. If you want more exposure, you're going to want to use an MLS. Like it just and you want to be in a region where the MLS can support it, or maybe you want to be on a national level MLS, which that's kind of what we operate with is a national level MLS that feeds into things. Those things are going to be what move the needle. Are the basics taken care of? If an MLS gets picked up by Zillow, and that's where you want to be, because 90% of the people out there are going to start on Zillow, whether they look at land or not, and then they're going to move over to other things. And then you have your land.coms and stuff like that that people look at. But are you moving the needle and getting on the basic things? Like that's because, and then if you have the luxury properties, those are the ones that I personally work with a lot of the times with the agents. That's a whole different story. We're going for press releases. We're going for Wall Street Journal. We're going for New York Times. We're going for, different things like that. We're going to try to get on story pickups if it's really unique and get people to talk about the story of the property. Like that, there is a marketing strategy there that doesn't exist with typical properties. But I'm going to dare say that most of the properties out there don't have these exorbitant things.
Yeah.
Now I could do a whole episode on marketing. I think I'll do that next, the marketing luxury properties, because it's a really cool process to do that. And watching a property get picked up in national publications and get national press and then get picked up, like that's a cool process. But the basic properties, everyone's doing roughly the same. I hate to say that because I want to say that what we as National Land do is so unique that nobody else can do it. Now we pull data and we track things, but like a lot of what we do is that it's the same thing that everybody else does. We get a lot of support that other organizations don't get because they're not as big and they don't focus on support, things like that. But the basics there, marketing gets too much credit, I guess is what I'm saying. It's like that whole price, the knowledge of you, the agent, Wayne Dunson in Texas, telling somebody that the property is worth a certain amount and they're going to work with the person, that's so much more valuable. And that's what makes the marketing valuable.
Yeah.
My
Well,
take.
so I mean, I tell everybody when they ask me about it that, like, look, from an exposure standpoint, we're going to whip anybody's butt in West Texas. Plain and simple. If you want good exposure and you want your property to shine, we're going to do it, right? You would throw it in Land Tour 360. Now, I know that doesn't spread off to Realtor.com or Zillow or whatever, but it's still going to be out in all those other sites trying to drive them back to our website if they want to see that. But I mean, I do think marketing is huge, but at the end of the day, when we look at the price side of it, we're competing with the neighbor or whoever else is up for sale. And if they got the same property and we're 100,000 over what they are, we got a problem. And they're going to get the buyer first. So
That is the thing. Like if you go to market and you could be lower, but let's say you have trash photos and you've written a one sentence thing like we have sagebrush
yeah,
and you go to market with that, you're not going to sell as much as but I still drive this back to the agent.
yeah,
You go out and take the photos. You make the place look beautiful to a buyer. You make that package something that somebody wants to purchase and you set the price. Like to me, those are so much more important than where it is as far as where it is on like is it on the right website? Because I most of the land realtors out there are going to go to the same websites. That there's different little partnerships, but they're all going to end up in the same places eventually. But did the right photos get taken? You brought up land tour again, proprietary technology that we have. Uh,
yeah,
it we enable three-dimensional touring of land from the sky to where like you can actually walk through the land without ever stepping foot on it. Like that's a unique thing. We can say that, but the agent, Wayne, you've got to do that. And
yeah.
it still comes down to the agent's work. So again, marketing gets more credit than what I feel like the agent should in that scenario. It does. It comes down to the agent. Like what did you do and how did you set that up with the client? I don't know. I felt like that was an important thing to cover in the topic of pricing because I think it plays a role, when somebody looks at selling their property, like what are you going to do to market it? Like step back. Who's the agent and what's the price that they're telling you and why? That's
Well, and I hadn't really even thought about it. I mean, thanks for the plug on that side, putting it on the agent. I mean, that's cool. But I guess in a way, yeah, you're right. Because it's the total package. We got to take the product and it's got to be presented in a nice way too. And whether it's a good description or whatever, I mean, all the things come together to make a united front that we put out there to try to show your property to as many people as possible in the best light possible, and try to outdo the competitor. And hopefully, if we're priced right, the marketing will drive more traffic to ours anyway, and then we're going to try to win that deal. And it's a lot easier to just compare apples to apples when I talk to people about selling a house, and I'm like, look, if we put this out on the market, you're just trying to outcompete the neighbor, and if you want to sell before they do, we need to be pretty aggressive, probably. So it's not quite the same on that, because you don't drive down the highway and there's 6 real estate signs and they're all square sections, and they're all the same land, and they're all for sale with different companies, and we're all trying to price it. Then you're going to end up going to be like a stinking auction, right? They're going to race to the bottom. Then you don't want that. But uh yeah, you're right though. I mean, there's got to be some. If you don't have a knowledgeable agent that really understands land, they're not going to do a good job anyway, because they don't know what they're talking about. And they're going to be like, oh, it's got a lot of good grass, and there's some trees, and there's some acres. And if you want to put your RV out here, I mean, that doesn't sound that great. And then they take an aerial map they printed out, and then they draw your place off with a marker and stick that in that. That's horrible. Like, this not, you can't tell crap about that. And I see it all the time online. Well, I haven't seen it much lately, but yeah, I'll run into that where you see it. And
Oh, I've
going,
seen them all over the place where it's the
it's
hand-drawn marker on a
yeah,
map. Like,
yeah, it's just really sad.
yeah.
And that you don't want that. And here's a good one that I just had this week. And it came off Zillow. All right, that's not where I expect it to come from, but this guy calls on an almost $2 million property, and he's a Zillow lead. So I reach out to him, and cool dude. I never talked to him before. Big cow man. Yeah, like a 500 head herd, which is really big for out here. And he goes, "Can you send me a soils map?" You think your traditional residential realtor is going to have a soils map that they can just pull up, or even know that you can access it on USDA's Web Soil Survey or whatever?
Send it to our website where you can pull it right from our website.
Yeah, no. In this case, I made him. So I made him a custom one and sent it.
Went to the extra mile. Yes.
Yeah. So I made him one in another platform where I could put his name and do all the stuff and make it pretty. But that's where you need somebody that actually knows about land to some degree, because you call somebody in a residential office and they're gonna be like, "Soils map? I don't even know what that is," right? And he really was dead serious. He goes, "I've got some country near there, and if it's the same soils, I could plant some wheat and hay over there on those old fields. I can break them back out and put them in blah, blah." We had a whole discussion about soil types. I get it. So it's not a normal call. I don't get that call every day, but it's exactly what he wanted, and I sent him what he wanted. So, that's where you really need to have somebody that's actually knowledgeable in land. And just because there's some hillbilly realtor out in the middle of nowhere doesn't mean they really know a hell of a lot about anything. They might be positioned in a place where they sell a lot of land because there's no houses there anyway, hardly. But it doesn't mean they've got expertise in their knowledge. It doesn't mean that they've got access to the tools that we have. There's a whole thing about I mean, there's so much we could talk about it all day, I think.
I would agree. So, and again, I do want to make sure I don't want to undercut marketing. But the tools that real estate companies utilize have become so similar across the board. There's a lot that's very, very similar. Like our efforts, I do. I have one of the best teams I've ever worked with. The company is one of the best cultures I've ever been around, and the stuff that we do is amazing. When it comes down to it, like a lot of the outlets that people use are very similar, but you want to make sure that your agent has access to good tools, good support. They're not going to hang out to dry because they missed some paperwork. Like that's the kind of stuff that we support on all those kind of things. Those things really matter when it comes down to the sale. If you're looking at it like, what are you going to do to market my property? That's the first thing you should ask. Is a luxury property. Is your product something that other people want to buy? If it's just a chunk of land, which again, you can't sell emotions, then that shouldn't be your primary consideration. Your primary consideration should be everything that we've talked about so far: pricing, making sure that you've got the right agent to work with, you've got the right data that agent has presented to you. those are the kind of things. If it's luxury real estate, that's when you really need to talk to us because that's when we blow the pants off other things because that
Sure.
that's the
Yeah.
marketing efforts. But that doesn't mean we don't do a great job with the other stuff. It's just that the other stuff, it's so similar. It's how do you differentiate this field from that field? Like that's on the buyer, and that comes down to the price because when things are similar, they become commoditized, right? Where it's like it's a you mentioned a race to the bottom, where it's like it comes down to price, and price is the great equalizer when it comes to this stuff, and it's that's why I wanted to have this conversation because it's so important in the overall scheme of things. Is how did that get figured out? Now, again, marketing matters. Like, don't get somebody out there taking crap photos and drawing on a map with marker. That's horrible. But don't put that as your top. Work with somebody on the price and make sure you hit the market right, and make sure that you know understand the land use right. Like you spoke to solar, and not everybody understands that a property can be used for solar. Like, make sure you've covered those bases.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, at the end of the day, we were talking about somebody coming out and buying the listing, so they shoot you this high number. It's really important, I think, and it's hard to know sometimes, to be on the landowner side to know uh, who they're dealing with, right? So I mean that could be hard if they don't live around there or whatever. Just inherited some property and they've got no idea what they're working with. But like you said, it's good to ask questions because at the end of the day, this is not an original idea from me. I gleaned this from another guy that's a super successful businessman, and he calls it paying the crap tax. And he says you can pay for the junk and you're going to end up having to rebuy it and rebuy it and rebuy it and rebuy it. Or you could go pay for the top dollar stuff and it's going to last you forever. And you end up paying less, right? And that's what happens if you let somebody, some Jake leg person that doesn't have any data to support what they're telling you, and they show up and they're come up with this crazy figure, right? And you go with that, and then they're also offering to cut their commission because they don't have any tools anyway. Right? It's not. Well, I don't care. We do it for nothing, right? And just throw that baby out there at a super high price, and we'll sell that tomorrow. And then you never hear from them again. And that's called paying the crap tax, right? You'll probably end up selling that thing for less. You're paying taxes in the meantime. You're wasting effort on the market. And I think some people unfortunately get stuck with that and don't even mean to, right? They just get hung with a bad one. But they pay the crap tax ultimately for that. And so you got to be aware of these people. If they're offering to cut their own water right now on their rate to get your listing, and I'm not going to say that doesn't happen. Sometimes we get some neat ones who are like, look, let's make a deal. I really want this. But just in general, if they're already saying, look, I'm going to go ahead and cut you down to whatever rate, well, how are they going to treat your property when they get an offer in? Are they going to do the same to you and start cutting your price because they're
Red
just trying to
flag.
get a deal? Right.
Red
It can,
flag. Yeah.
yeah. So be careful about that. And because again, it's we get into this stuff about the pricing, and there's just a lot of bad things that could happen out there.
Yeah, and that's that's where I wanted to get to is like I said, I don't want to undercut the marketing. But that stuff matters so much more. Now when it comes down to it, I mean, I think you're right. If you're comparing apples to apples and talking about website traction, yeah, we're going to stomp a lot of the smaller things because we've got a lot of stuff on our website. We have a juggernaut when it comes to that, or we have the technology there to make sure agents have the right price when they get there instead of relying on hopefully they got the right opinion. We've got actual data and technology to back it up. Like that's why a company like ours is good because we have those tools and those resources. And then we have a nation of agents that our agents can talk to get advice. And it's that stuff is the stuff that matters. The shiny things on the outside are not as much as of the point. So that's yeah.
Yeah, and you had something on here, and I have it in my notes. Is price just an opinion? And I'll be honest, and I tell people this all the time. So look, you send three appraisers to appraise something, and they may all come back with something a little different, right? Because we're humans, so we all see stuff a little bit differently. Our experiences are a little bit different. We may adjust something just a little bit different, but they're probably all going to fall in a very close range. And so that's why I'm never going to nail down unless I just sold the property next door and it's just like it, and we got this per acre. I'm open to, yeah, we would give it a little bit of flexibility because I got these numbers and they're within $100 an acre of each other. So, if you want to put it here, I'm good with that because we'll see what the market does with it, right? That's why I say the buyer may set the price because we don't know what they're going to do with it sometimes. So it may not always be super clear cut. So I don't think price is just opinion, but opinion can go into it because it's usually supported by some facts, but they may not be exact. And so then it goes in with experience on the market and what have other properties you've dealt with done before? What are our market conditions today? What are rates doing? What's going to drive traffic? What's demand here? Some of that stuff can play into that, right? And there's where some of the opinion can go into the pricing. But ultimately, it still needs to be backed up by factor. You're just flying blind at that point.
Yeah. Well, hey, we've run over, man, and I know that you have a kid to pick up.
I do actually. I was like, I'm going. Dang, I'm supposed to go get him.
I need to kick you out of here. So, man, Wayne, always it's a pleasure. Thank you very much. And I'm going to say it. Stay tuned for the next one because I'm definitely going to cover the luxury property marketing. That is a fun process for anybody interested. And check out Wayne's other podcast that he's done with us. Wayne's done what is the difference between residential and land? You've worked with us talking about land laws, about things to avoid when it comes down to looking at land or when you have land to sell, different things that can get you in trouble or things that you should look for legally. And we've talked about solar energy. Not only did we do one on solar land development, we had a solar developer come in because he heard you speaking and wanted to address the other side of the table of what solar companies looking for. Check out some of Wayne's other podcasts. They're excellent and they're well worth the listen.
And while we're plugging, shameless, but I also have a new blog. Thankfully, I got some help from the marketing department. I'm not going to say they totally rewrote it, but I guarantee it's much more eloquent than I write and talk.
Go, Bryce.
Yeah, I did phenomenal. But I did. It's got to do with hunting and opening day in Texas is coming in a couple of weeks, and I was just jotting down my thoughts on all the hard work that I've put into prep this year, and I really busted my hump to get some stuff done to adjust for last year. And it was just a fun little read. It's short, but I think a lot of people could really put themselves in the same shoes I'm in about how we all prep for deer season every year. So excellent.
Everybody check out the blog.
Anyway, man, Mac, I think I could spend a half a day. One of these days, though, I'm going to come out there to where you live and we're going to go climb a mountain.
We're going to go climb a mountain. I agree.
Yeah. Anyway, well, thanks for having me on, Mac. I really appreciate it. It's a lot of fun.
Hey, man, take care.
All right.
Hey, everybody, and thank you for listening to yet another episode. This is episode 114 for the National Land Realty Podcast, discussing pricing in land real estate sales with West Texas land real estate broker Wayne Dunson. You can learn more about land ownership and the buying and selling of land at nationallands.com.